Sahih al-Bukhari number 2796 and Sunnah al-Tirmidhi state that Muslims have to obey the ruler of a country as long as the ruler does not force the Muslims to commit a sin. A long and complicated answer makes clear, however, that the relationships between Islam and a European secular state are problematic. Ultimately, the question is not if specific Western laws are compatible with Islam or not. The question is if Western democracies possess intrinsic safeguards that would kick in against a subtle demographic subversion of its secular core. I wrote a thesis about this on the Post Online and recently touched upon it on my writing on Bassam TV. We need a strong European Leitkultur to defend our secular identity against demographic subversion. As more facts about the demographic makeup of our major European cities become available, it is clear that this is not just a battle of ideas between rationalism and faith, but that it is also a battle of fertility between sterile, emancipated populations and prolific conservative groups. And when it comes to the continued existence of the West as we know it, even jihad is irrelevant. The truth is that the end game of Western democracy will be decided in the wombs of our mothers and wives. And I don't consider it a taboo to talk about this. It's a hard fact of life that stares everyone right in the eye. And the liberal left has made it a talking point here in Belgium. Herman de Croo stated in an interview that within 2 generations, and I quote, Islamic immigrants will make up the majority in Antwerp. And then it would be bye-bye Bart de Wever, meaning goodbye to the Flemish Nationalist Alliance. Yet it is strange how de Croo could say this so triumphantly, as it is highly unlikely that liberals will benefit from this demographic evolution. The Dutch Senator Kees de Lange said things even sharper when he stated that, and I quote, development aid only stimulates Africa as the biggest breeding ground for Muslims. None of this should be surprising. Family values have always been important for conservative parties. In the Netherlands, Catholics traditionally encouraged big families as a wedge for a bigger share of the political pie. After the Protestants rose up against the Spanish king, Catholics were marginalized for centuries. The only way they had to win back power was through higher birth rates. Everyone knew this. It's absolutely not a taboo, and surely not at that time. And this lesson is a lesson that mainstream conservatives seem to have forgotten, but the Islam certainly has not. Look at London, see what's happening there. Lingerie commercials disappear and Sharia courts are established along with so-called modesty beaches. And all of this is defended by those who have the most to lose from it, which is, the progressive, modern, feminists and the secular left. And the ultimate consequence is known in nations such as Algeria and such as Egypt, where military force had to be used to prevent an irreversible theocratic takeover and democracy had to be postponed. Demographic figures and policy analysis in the Netherlands show that European Muslims are only getting more and more conservative. 70% of them are zealous and seculars are only 5%. Well, why is this relevant? Because the European Union in 2002 defined the aim to make textbooks shed a more positive light on Islam. Sylvain Guggenheim is a French author, and he made it a point to emphasize the contributions of Aramaic and Christian Syrians. And he argued that these groups carried the transfer of knowledge from the Middle East to Europe. Muslims were raised to consider their Arabic language and Quran as superior to works and books of other cultures, and I will now explain why this is an existentially important point for understanding the dynamic between Europe and the Islamic world. Europe, being originally heathen and becoming Christian, had to look outside itself, had to understand a religion that came from Jerusalem. Europeans had to interpret Hebrew and Greek texts to make sense of their core beliefs. There were debates about interpretations, and there was a hopeful quest to seek outside of Europe's boundaries. Whereas for the Islam, its holy book is planted in its own heartland, written in its own Arabic language, as a series of binding commands, with Muhammad as the most perfect man and the seal of the prophets, whose example has to be followed wherever possible. And this means that as a culture, the Islamic world never truly had to look beyond itself. An uncreated Quran means the word of Allah is an infallible guideline on how to live. And the concept of an uncreated Quran is intrinsically opposed to democracies, which are by nature a fallible product of compromise. And at this point, there's so much I have not even touched upon. Al-Ghazali, his occasionalism, and the fatalistic interpretation of Al-Qadar. The contrast between Kalam and Falsafa, and what this all means for the possibility of a Quran that can be historically interpreted. Because that is the whole deal. If the Quran can be interpreted historically, then a reform of Islam is possible. If the Quran is the literal word of Allah that exists beyond humanity, as a pure code outside of time and space, then the believer is commanded to follow the infallible word of Allah above a fallible democracy. In that case, reform is impossible. Then there is only the infernal battle between the Dar al-Harb and the Dar al-Islam.